Hi, I'm Cheryl Strachan. I'm a registered dietitian. I specialize in cardiac nutrition. I worked for 9 years for one of Canada's leading cardiac rehabilitation programs. And in 2014, I founded Sweet Spot Nutrition, which is a private practice and a blog dedicated to helping people with heart concerns who want a little extra support. And last year, I wrote the 30-minute Heart Healthy Cookbook, which you can find on major booksellers online now. So as I record this, we're about 6 months into the pandemic, and I've been thinking a lot about people who had a heart event this year and are dealing with that over and above COVID and everything else that we're all kind of grappling with in 2020. And that, for me, I use the term heart event as a general term to make sure to include people who've had a heart attack, but also people who didn't have a heart attack and instead maybe had to have a stent put in or had to have a bypass operation. So all of you are kind of in the same boat in that you're not able to go live and in person to a cardiac rehabilitation program in the same way that you would have if this happened to you any other year. And a lot of what you're getting from cardiac rehab program, you're probably getting online. Hopefully you're getting lots of support remotely and you're able to exercise at home. But I fear that the nutrition experience may not be as rich as what people normally get. So I thought maybe I can fill in a little bit of that gap because food can be a source of stress after having a heart event, right? Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, foods that they used to love now become the enemy. And they feel like maybe they have to eat a lot of things. They don't really like eating that much salads and lentils. What do you do with lentils anyways, right? And you maybe are dealing with lots of different people telling you their opinion about what you should eat. And of course, they're not all the same. Even the experts can't agree. And that's a big frustration for people, right? Or maybe you just don't have time or you don't like cooking that much. And on top of all of the things you've got going on now, from maybe a new exercise routine and a handful of new medications and lots of doctor's appointments, now you got to figure out this food thing too. So I thought maybe I can fill in a little bit of the gap there for what you're not getting from a live in-person cardiac rehab program and make this no longer a source of stress for you because we want you to have less stress, right? When you have a heart problem. So let's talk about how you can reduce your risk of another cardiac event. For sure, we can do that with food, but also still enjoy eating and get on with the business of living your life. So let's jump in. So this is the first of 3 videos, and today I'm going to talk about the 6 keys to success when it comes to eating well for life after a heart event, and then we'll get into the details. So video number 2 is going to look at 10 pitfalls that I want to help you avoid, and video number 3, I'm going to tackle as many frequently asked questions as I can. I think that video could be 3 hours long, but we'll try to keep it to sort of the top 10 or so questions. So quickly, a preview of the 6 keys to success. And fun fact, only one of these has to do with what foods you eat. The first one, very important, about mindset, which is you are the boss. So you may get advice from people, but at the end of the day, you know what works for you, and you get to decide which foods you're going to eat. Number 2, this is the one about what foods to eat. In general, I would say think Mediterranean, and we'll get into what that looks like. Number 3, cook. If you're not already into cooking, this is your chance because really cooking at home almost always is going to be healthier for you than restaurant eating or eating ultra-processed food out of the box. To make that happen, number 4, you're going to need a plan. Number 5, I want to make sure you eat. Sometimes people think after a heart attack they can't eat their favorite foods, they can't eat this, they can't eat that. But actually, flip that on its head. It's going to be more about the cardioprotective foods that you do eat. They're going to help you be healthier. And finally, make sure you enjoy the foods you eat. We get a lot of satisfaction from food, and let's keep it that way as we move forward and become healthier. So our first principle is about mindset, and you'll hear echoes of this through the rest of the videos. And I bring it up because after you've had a heart attack or some other kind of problem with your heart, everybody's got an opinion about what you should or shouldn't eat. You'll hear advice from friends and family, maybe your spouse, your physician. If you see a dietitian, we'll have some advice for you. But hopefully you work with a dietitian like me who looks at you and says, okay, I know some things about heart health and food, but you know you, and that's the most important part of this equation. And our job is really to be your guide through figuring out, given the unique circumstances of your life, whether it's your budget, your schedule, your family dynamics, your culture, and your taste preferences, what foods are going to work for you and support your health. But we are all just advisors, maybe consultants if you want to think of us that way, and you're the CEO. So you get to decide. And that way we know whatever food choices you go with, that's going to be a more sustainable approach for you, and you won't get that inner rebel wanting to rebel when other people are making the decisions. So one way you can kind of know if you've been giving your power away is if you hear yourself saying things like, I'm not allowed. Say, I'm not allowed to have chicken fingers anymore. I'm not allowed to have pizza anymore. I mean, you might say something like that at a social event just to kind of deflect and make that decision easier, not get into an argument with someone. But if you're internally saying that to yourself, or if you're saying, I should have something, I should have the salad, I really don't want it, but I know I should have it, then you've given away your power, right? Because at the end of the day, you're an adult, you get to decide. And what I'd rather hear someone say, instead of I can't have this or I should have that, I'd like to hear you say, I've decided to have the salad. Why? Well, I'd really love some chicken fingers, but I'm working on my blood pressure and this is something that's really important to me. So I've decided to go for the salad. So now you're the one in the driver's seat, and that's going to feel a whole lot better than feeling like someone else is making those decisions for you. And similarly, I'm always happy when I hear people say, I decided to have the pizza, or I decided to have chicken wings. I had a tough week. I know I ate really healthy all week and they looked so good and they were delicious. End of story. Moving on. No judgment, no guilt. Okay, so there's one key in here that has to do with what to eat. And for this, I like to start with the Mediterranean way of eating. Not just because I get to use these great pictures in my slides, which I do love, but because we have evidence that eating in this way can help reduce the incidence of cardiovascular events, which at the end of the day is what we all really want, right? For you to live a longer, healthier life. So we have a couple of good studies that have shown this. One, if you are interested in these things and you want to look it up, is the Lyon Heart Study, named for Lyon, France, where about 600 people who'd had their first heart attack were randomly assigned to either follow the Mediterranean style of eating or the prudent Western diet, they called it, what was being recommended to people at that time in the 1990s. And they followed these people about 4 years or so. So there were about 300 of them in each group. And they tracked the cardiovascular events. And the major outcome was looking at either another heart attack or death from cardiac causes. And that happened to 44 people in the control group and only 14 in the Mediterranean group. So a significant reduction, about a 75% reduction in cardiovascular events. So there are no guarantees, as with everything, no one gets out alive, but quite a few less people had cardiovascular events. And they tracked other events as well, symptoms and hospital admissions for different things. And the trend was very strong towards the Mediterranean diet, which is why you hear so much about that in cardiac rehab programs, because this was what we call a secondary prevention study, not having another event. And it was followed up by the PREDIMED study more recently. I think this was about 2012 or 2013, the first report came out. And this one was a prevention, primary prevention. So looking at people who had not already had a heart attack, but a similar design where they were randomly assigned either to follow the Mediterranean diet or a control diet. And it was a much bigger study, took place in Spain. And again, we saw this time about a 30% drop in cardiovascular events in the people following the Mediterranean diet. So we can really hang our hat on the Mediterranean approach. The other reason I really like this is it's not a diet in the way you might think of a diet typically. It's flexible. It's not restrictive. There aren't hard and fast rules about what you can and cannot eat. And I find that works better for most people. So what does the Mediterranean diet look like? Is it olive oil and red wine, feta cheese? It can be, but it definitely doesn't have to be. So there are 16 countries that border the Mediterranean Sea, and they all have different styles of cuisine and different traditional foods. And you don't have to necessarily eat any of them to be following a Mediterranean style diet. What we're after, and what was emphasized in the two studies I mentioned, is mostly plant-based foods, mostly minimally processed. And so you'll see at the base of this pyramid here, fruits and vegetables, of course, but then also grains, mostly whole grains, things like bulgur and farro and couscous and pasta are plentiful in the Mediterranean diet. Beans and other legumes like chickpeas and lentils, as well as nuts and seeds and olive oil, of course, as you might think. And then for protein, of course, we get some protein from those plant foods, but you can also add fish if you like fish. I would especially think of fish as a great protein source in a Mediterranean and a heart-healthy diet. And then to the extent that you want to include them, there's room for poultry, eggs, milk products like cheese and yogurt on either a daily or a weekly basis, again, depending on your preference. And then red meat and sweets can be there if you like them, but they're usually de-emphasized relative to a typical Western diet. And with the red wine, it's always kind of thought of as being part of the Mediterranean diet, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And we don't really know. We've had studies of looking at the whole package, but we can't say, oh, this component or that component is the reason this works so well. It's kind of a package deal, but there isn't enough health benefit associated with wine that I would say you should go out of your way to drink it if you're not already doing that, because we know there are lots of downsides as well to drinking alcohol, especially if you're not drinking it in moderation. So red wine's a maybe. And that, in a nutshell, is basically the Mediterranean way of eating. Of course, with everything dietary, the devil is in the details, and people always have a million questions after this, right? What if I can't eat fish? Isn't there too much mercury? Are potatoes okay? Isn't there too much sugar in the fruit? And I'm happy to answer all of those questions in the third video and more. But for now, just hang tight and let me reassure you that it doesn't have to be much more complicated than this. So try to get more of those fruits and vegetables and other plant-based foods in. Emphasize fish if you like it, and maybe cut back a little bit on some of those other things. And it doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. So the rest of the principles have more to do with how you eat versus specifically what you eat. So no matter what's on the menu, you're usually better off cooking yourself, for example, versus going to a restaurant or ordering takeout or eating something out of a box. Why is that? A couple of reasons. Number one, you'll probably put more nutrition in it. And in this, when I'm specifically kind of thinking of comparing to your ultra processed packaged food, something that, you put in the microwave and then it's ready 5 minutes later, usually is not going to have as much nutrition as something that you cook. Think of whole grains, for example. Pretty tough to find those in restaurant meals, but you can put them in your meals at home if you're thinking in terms of that. And of course, what you make at home will have less of lots of things too, right? Smaller portions, less sodium, less sugar. Even when you think you're ordering something pretty healthy. Say, for example, in Canada, we have a restaurant called Milestones. They have a salad that's called the Superfood Chop Salad. Sounds really healthy, right? Turns out it has more than a day's worth of sodium and more than a day's worth of added sugar. You go to Olive Garden and order the chicken parmesan. Chicken sounds healthy, right? That's more than a day's worth of calories for most people, or food energy. So you just make less food when you make it yourself. But I am always highly aware of how much cooking can put an onus on people who are already busy and maybe stressed. So I just want to talk for a minute a little bit about processed food. So as you might know, I wrote the 30-minute Heart Healthy Cookbook. And this is partly because I don't like to spend a lot of time cooking in my kitchen. So I always like to defend some processed foods because we tend to think black and white when it comes to food. There's either what some people call clean food. I don't like to use that term. Very unprocessed or minimally processed food like these carrots. And at the other end of the spectrum is something ultra processed, engineered specifically to make you just want to eat more and more and more. But in the real world, it's really not a dichotomy like this. It's more of a spectrum from minimally processed food to this ultra processed food. And there are lots of things in the middle that can help you have a heart healthier diet and cook at home in less time. And those are the kinds of things we want to make sure to get into the kitchen. So if you want to cook everything from scratch like those carrots, have at it. But if you don't have time or you don't have the inclination to do that, something like the frozen butternut squash here, I will never buy a regular butternut squash again. These are wonderful for making soups or side dishes. They're great. The Power Bowl here, I bring this one in because it's a little bit provocative, because most frozen meals are super high in sodium And they don't actually give you a lot of calories, which is not good because we want you to have enough food in your body to be fueled and nourished through the day. And most frozen meals don't have a lot of nutrition, but some of them do. And this is an example of one that actually read the label. The ingredients are pretty regular stuff. This would be like something you make in your kitchen and then freeze yourself. And I'm not specifically endorsing this brand. There are lots of other frozen meals out there that aren't that bad. So out here in the real world, we can eat some processed food, but I want you to take a good close look at that ingredient list, the nutrition facts, and make choices that are closer to things you would cook at home. So the next key to eating well after a heart event is to have a plan. And I always hesitate to use the word meal plan because I know that scares some people off. But I have to tell you, most of the people who I've met over my career who are healthy eaters have some kind of a plan to figure out what they're going to eat. And if you're not already doing that, here are a few reasons why it's a really good idea. Number one, that's a way you can make it happen. And by it, I mean this cooking and this heart healthier eating that you're aiming to do becomes much easier if you have some kind of plan. Another reason is it helps you with a greater variety of foods in your diet, which is great for nutrition, but I'm thinking more in terms of making it enjoyable for you because eating the same thing again and again gets really boring and no one wants to stay on a diet that's boring. So just having a few minutes a week to sit down, look through some recipes, and make a decision to cook at least one new thing, kind of experiment and expand your repertoire, may make it more enjoyable to stick with what you're doing. You can save time, of course, having a plan for what you're going to eat. I always think of the poor person at 5 p.m. who's rolling into the grocery store on their way home from work because they need to grab something for dinner. And now you're standing in line with a whole bunch of other people and you're just thinking, really, like, I don't need to be here. So while it takes some time up front to sit down and make a plan, if you can do it for, once a week, you go to the grocery store, you get everything you need. In the long run, you'll save some time. And of course, if you can manage to do it in such a way that you minimize your food waste and maybe even do your order online so you don't have a lot of those, I'm hungry and it's 5 o'clock and I'm spontaneously buying things in the store that I wasn't planning to buy, then you might even save some money as well. And the final reason, and this is really important for people with heart disease, is it can help you reduce stress. Right? It's never fun when people are hungry and it's 5:30 and you're still kind of like, what am I making for dinner? I don't even know. Blah. So if you can have a plan in advance, that's one more thing that we can do to get your stress levels down. Now, having a plan might seem complicated and inflexible, and I hear people say to me sometimes, I might change my mind about what I want to eat, and all of that is fine. I want to make sure it's clear when I say have a plan, I do not mean you're going to sit down and write, there's 3 meals a day times 7 days a week equals 21 meals in a week. And you're not going to sit down and plan out 21 different meals. You're not going to plan every bite that goes into your body. The method that I recommend using is a pretty simple process. If you get right down to the bare bones of it, what I want you to do is check your inventory. So take a look in the fridge, especially to see what needs to get eaten before it goes bad, but also take a peek in the freezer and in the pantry. Is there something in there you want to get cooking? Take a look at your calendar and see if there's anything coming up that's going to affect the meal planning, and then make a plan. And you can do that from your head, or if you've got a bunch of cookbooks, that's great. Or one thing I like to recommend is what I call a go-to list, where we figure out a collection of things that you make regularly, that you like, that your family likes. So you're pulling from that list most of the time. Maybe sometimes you pick a new recipe out of a cookbook, but if you've got that go-to list, then it's really easy to plan your meals and snacks. And then off of that, you can very easily make your grocery list. So pretty straightforward stuff. Does not have to be complicated. And I should say, I usually just plan supper. And I'll recommend people, depending on how much they like to cook, plan anywhere from 3 to 5 suppers a week. And in terms of flexibility, you don't have to commit to having one on a certain night in the week. Of course, you can mix things up or change your mind as you go. But it is helpful to kind of think through, like, if one night, somebody in the family's got to be out because they've got an activity, that's going to impact what you cook. And the other reason it's nice to figure out which thing you're going to cook on which night is if you want to have more perishable foods up front and things that are more pantry stable at the end of the week, then it's helpful to think of, okay, what's Monday, what's Tuesday, what's Wednesday. But I typically don't recommend that people plan more than 5 days in the week, just to be realistic. And maybe if you're a super cook, you're like, no, Cheryl, I'm going to cook 6 or 7 different things. But for most people, 5 is about all they want to cook. And then on the other 2 nights, maybe they're kind of just whipping something up from the pantry, or they're pulling, hopefully you've got some leftovers frozen. You can pull leftovers out of the freezer, or maybe you're eating out or going to have a meal with a friend. So 5 is about the most I usually suggest. And for somebody who's not a big cook, we might even just have them plan 2 or 3 things they're going to make in the course of a week. Hopefully double those recipes, and that way you have lots left over and you don't have to do a lot of cooking, but you have lots of homemade food around. And then when it comes to the other meals in the day, I don't really make a big effort to plan for breakfast, lunch, or snacks. For those, I usually rely on just the same 2 or 3 things, kind of getting some good healthy routines and habits going. And for lunches, we use leftovers a lot so that you can kind of bring in the effort you made in cooking the night before. And if you want to create something out of the ordinary, you want to try a new snack recipe, or you want to try a new breakfast recipe for a special meal, great. But for your day-to-day planning around meals and snacks, don't feel like you have to go overboard and plan every single one of them. Pretty easy, right? It's doable. And it can make a big difference in terms of how much you're cooking and how much you enjoy the food. The next key might seem kind of obvious, but it's actually not, and that is to eat. And the reason I bring this up is because often after a heart event, people will tell you to lose weight. Your doctor, people at your cardiac rehab program, maybe a spouse or a family member is leaning on you like, you got to lose some weight, right? You've had this heart attack. So you think, okay, I'm going to cut back. I'm going to eat less. I'm going to limit my calories. And that may work in the short run. It may not. It works better for some people than others. But in the long run, for most people, it doesn't work, unfortunately. So I'd rather see you flip that on its head and think in terms of cardioprotective foods. What are the foods we can eat that can nourish our body, whether we lose weight or not? So again, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, fish. These are all foods, especially in combination, that have been shown to improve heart health. And so think about eating those foods as opposed to restricting what you eat. The other thing about eating is I find many people with heart disease don't often eat enough at the start of the day. And so then towards the end of the day, they get really hungry and they find it hard to resist cravings and to not eat the foods that they are trying not to eat. And part of that may be driven by emotional reasons and thoughts going through your head and lifelong habits. There are lots of reasons. But as the dietitian, I at least want to make sure that you take care of yourself from the start of the day, nourish your body well, so that at least you don't have physical hunger to grapple with towards the end of the day when you may be feeling more tired and stressed out, and it's harder to resist those cravings. So one way to make sure to get enough to eat throughout the day is to think in terms of the plate model, which was brought to life in the New Canada's Food Guide, and they use something like this in the United States too. And the basic idea is to think for every meal of about half of what you have on your plate or in your bowl or whatever's on the menu, about half of that being vegetables or fruit, and something in the mix for protein and something for whole grains, about a quarter of the plate for each of those latter two. And you don't have to exactly meet this, but it's just kind of a general guide. So I find at breakfast, sometimes people miss the protein. That's a tricky one at breakfast, right? There aren't tons of breakfast foods that give us a lot of protein, but Greek yogurt is an option. Having some cheese, this is a great place to have a bit of cheese because we can all use a bit more protein at breakfast. Maybe some peanut butter, eggs, something to get in the system that'll help you feel nourished and not quite as hungry later in the day. And making sure you've got some grains at breakfast. Everybody's different, but I do find that the people who don't eat a lot of grains at breakfast and at lunch are often the same people who are hungry later in the day and they're craving things and they're snacking in ways they don't like. So if every time you sit down to a meal, you can kind of think in terms of this general picture, you may find it easier to keep on track with the way you want to be eating later in the day. So the last principle is to enjoy your food. And that might sound like something just nice to say, like motherhood and apple pie. But I'm actually also looking out for your health and well-being when I say that. So 3 reasons why. First of all, as you see here, food is one way we bond with the people we love. And having a strong community around you is one of the keys to living a long and healthy life. Now, I'm not saying you always have to bake cookies or otherwise indulge with your friends and family, but if you sometimes decide to do that, that's okay. The second reason is that telling yourself you can't have a particular food is a surefire way to develop a craving for it. So trying to be too strict generally doesn't work in the long run. There's even some evidence that the occasional planned deviation from a goal might help you stay on track and be more likely to achieve it in the long run. And third, food is one of life's great pleasures. So you survived this heart attack. Now it's time to live. And depriving yourself of something that you previously have gotten a lot of enjoyment out of may set you up to resent the whole situation and give up altogether. And here's a great example of what can happen. This is a study that was done at a cardiac rehabilitation program in Germany in 2006. And the researchers interviewed participants about their diets before they came to the program, and using objective criteria, categorized them as good, poor, or fair. And I always like to point out, by the way, a third of the people were eating a good diet. And this happens, and I've seen this in my experience as well. You can be eating a perfectly good diet and have a heart event for other reasons. So just because this happened to you doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with your diet. But when we started this program, about a third, when people were in the program, the compliance with quote unquote a heart healthy diet or a quote good diet went way up. About 91% of the people were categorized as having a good diet during the cardiac rehab program. But what do you think happened when researchers interviewed them again about a year later? That number dropped about in half. So at that point, only 49% of the people were following what they considered to be a good diet. What happened to those other people that dropped down either into the fair or the poor range? There can be many possible reasons, but I think one of those may be that they never got to a place where they were enjoying their heart healthy diet. And part of that is trying to be too strict and trying to deprive yourself too much. And then you see again, three years after the program, the compliance with the quote good diet was a little bit lower even. So let's make sure that you enjoy the food you're eating. So what are some ways you can do that? You might be sitting here saying, Cheryl, I don't enjoy having a salad for dinner every night, and I never will. But here are some practical tips you can do to kind of get closer to that place where you're actually enjoying the food. So first of all, experiment with your food. And you see this picture on the right here, and I brought this one back, the sweet spot, for a reason. The sweet spot is the overlap between food that's good for your health and food that's delicious to you, food that you enjoy. And if for you, that green heart is tiny, if there's very little food that overlaps, then our job is to help you figure out how to expand that green heart. Trying new foods, trying new recipes, trying new ways of cooking vegetables and other things may be the way to expand that and get you to have a bigger repertoire of food that's good for your heart, but that you also enjoy. Number 2, you'll be glad to hear that your taste buds will adjust. I hear this from people all the time. For example, with sugar, people will say, I used to have all this sugar in my coffee and then I slowly cut it back. You may be drinking it black even, or just 1 small teaspoon of sugar in your coffee. And they'll say, and now I taste the coffee the way I used to have it, and it tastes too sweet. Or people will tell me, you cook more at home. I don't use a lot of salt. And then I go out to restaurants and it tastes too salty to me now. You get used to eating this way. And so you may find you enjoy it if you just give it a little bit of a chance. So number 3, take some time to eat with other people. That can help improve your enjoyment as well. Number 4, embrace imperfection, right? As I said, you don't have to be perfect. So if you're 80% of the time eating pretty healthy and 20% you're choosing foods for other perfectly legitimate reasons, whether it's enjoyment or just because you're time crunched and you needed something in a hurry, that's okay. And finally, take some time to eat. Right? Our lives are so rushed. We're busy. We go. And sometimes we don't even stop to notice the food as it's going into us. So if you can take some time, slow down, even for 10, 15 minutes, and get some satisfaction out of the food you're eating, you may find that you're not as hungry and you're actually really enjoying it. So there you have it. In a nutshell, those are the 6 keys to eating for life after a hard event. And you've got this, okay? You're the boss. You decide what foods work for you and what don't. And don't let anyone else tell you what you should or shouldn't eat. In general, think Mediterranean. And hopefully by now you realize that just means lots of whole, minimally processed plant-based foods. Fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, whole grains, fish, olive oil, and nothing's off the menu. Nothing's restricted, but certain things you may have less of so that you can make room for all of those good plant foods in your diet. Number 3, do more cooking and less eating out of boxes and eating from restaurants. Number 4, plan what you're going to eat. That may help you be more successful and may help you get more variety of foods on the table that you enjoy. Number 5, don't forget to eat, right? Restricting your calories does not work in the long run. Making sure to eat a good, nourishing breakfast. Fuel yourself early in the day, and you may find it easier to stay on track in the evenings. And number 6, take the time and enjoy your food. You have lived, so let's live. Hopefully that gets you to my goal, which is for you to have more confidence in the kitchen, clarity around eating, so that we can get to this place where you're at a heart-healthy diet that does not stress you out. If you have further questions, I hope you'll stay tuned for videos number 2 and 3, because the devil is always in the details on this stuff, right? It's one thing to say in general, here are the 6 keys to success. But I'm going to next share with you 10 pitfalls that I have seen again and again in my career. People typically come to see me when they're having trouble. So I'll share with you some of the things they're having trouble with and how you can avoid those. And then in video number 3, we'll get into the frequently asked questions so that, again, by the end, we'll hopefully get you to that place where you're not stressed out about food and you can get on with living your life. Until then, be well, take care, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.